Welcome to another Learning Council podcast. This is your host, LeiLani. I'm publisher at Learning Council News Media and Research. And our topic today is trends impacting the future in K-12 education. So I have with me my longtime friend, Karl Rectanus, who is the Learn Platform CEO. You founded the company, right?
I
And
did.
then sold to Instructure. And now you are doing consulting and helping people basically confront this future that we're going to talk about today. Is there anything else you want to say to introduce yourself before we dive in?
It's good to see you, Leilani. Again, appreciate the work that you and the Learning Council do, and glad to talk about this important topic. You're right. So I was an educator and an administrator. I got the entrepreneurial bug and have had a number of successful, education innovation organizations. I did found and lead Learn Platform up until which was named one of the most innovative companies in the world. We really focused on rapid cycle evaluation, supporting districts, states, and ultimately their solution provider partners to figure out what's working best for which students to inform decision making. We partnered, actually, Instructure acquired that business where I led K-12 and platform strategy for just under a year, and now advise decision makers, company leaders, policymakers, educators, on how we make this education system work for all students, not just for students and teachers, but for our economy and competitiveness in the world.
And certainly there was a need to dive into what you dove into because the complexity, I mean, it's the whole reason I founded Learning Council in the first place. I knew, having spent 4 years in the encryption software market and then being in media for so many years, I looked around one day and I thought, well, we did a count. There was like 9,000 companies in the software space in K-12 alone. And
Mhm.
I thought, wow, well, they're not ready for this. They're like, so the complexity and the average number of logins, even a couple of years ago when we surveyed, was like 300 and something per teacher. And I thought, what a mess. What a total mess. So we need to bring order. And you were doing that with the evaluation so people could make sense of it, right?
Yeah, that's right. And in fact, Learn Platform was one of the first to publish, quantified research on edtech usage, and especially connected to achievement. We did launch in 2016 the EdTech Top 40, as well as some other informative research and analyses from our team. And Instructure continues to do that work. I think the latest EdTech Top 40 came out last summer, sharing the most used tools, as well as one of the interesting trends that's changed over that time is the which of those tools has ESSA aligned evidence. Has evidence of use and utility and effectiveness for the educators and teams that use them and the students they're impacting. So we're starting to see a maturation, I think, in the market. And
Yeah.
as we mature, I'm really excited about how we modernize because there's a lot of fantastic work. So glad to talk a little bit about the high level trends that we're seeing, both of us, you and I.
Yeah, and I know I'm gonna touch on our viewpoint as Learning Council from the dovetailing of all of our research into like our crystal ball, saying what the future holds. But why don't we start with you? Like, what are your top five of the trends that you think are impacting K-12? Why don't you go into those?
Well, I think there's a number, and it's always hard to pick five, like you said, with a complex system, that's in the process of transforming and modernizing the way I think the education sector in the U.S. is. Um, I'll just highlight the one that's getting probably the most visibility at number one, which is AI. I think there's larger systemic areas and trends, but I think the activation of AI into all sectors, but certainly in education, is really critical, and can be transformative over time. But that's one of the reasons I have agreed to voluntarily chair the industry council for a group called EdSafe AI. The SAFE framework, SAFE stands for safety, accountability, fairness, and effectiveness. It is a um, uh, it is a framework that is used both by districts, state leaders, and solution providers, as well as partners, to ensure that as we activate AI, we are doing the things that are mom and apple pie for educators, right? We're keeping students safe. We are doing so in a way that's accountable, that's fair, that's equitable, that's effective. And so we have already, as I've worked with policy leaders, with districts who are creating AI policies and building their AI literacy in meaningful ways. I happen to get to chair a group of industry leaders. Now, over 100 different companies in the education space have committed to the SAFE framework in their policies and practices and products, ranging from small, medium, large, extra large, public, private platforms on down to startups that are collectively arguing that as we implement AI, we should be safe about it. That they are
Right,
sharing what it means with policymakers to ensure that regulations that are very real and considered at federal and state levels are implemented in a way that is respectful and useful and takes care of students and teachers moving forward. And I'm really excited about the trend, not just of AI and modernization, some opportunities. There's certainly some risks, but the coalition of non-standard partners, not just 100 different companies, but NEA, AFT, the unions, the local policymakers, the nonprofits, ISTE, CETA, COSIN, usual suspects, and unusual suspects coming together to say, as a sector, we're going to do AI. We know that's something we can't put the genie back in the bottle. But if we're going to do it, let's do it the right way together. And I think
right.
that's a real opportunity.
Yeah, there's a lot more to be said about AI. I know when we're going to be on tour this fall, I'll just share this and describe it for our audio only listeners. But most of the time, when I see the industry talking about AI, they're talking about generative AI, and that's really all they know. And so we just asked the question on a survey we just closed: which types of AI do you have familiarity with? And 50% had none, right? Of all the types, right? They don't have familiarity with it. So generative AI, which is really the
Yeah.
one that is being pushed right now, and people want policies around everything else, it's very consumer oriented. And it's really only about 22% of people are even familiar with it at all. Image generators, they're a little bit more familiar with. Spatial temporal calendaring, not very much at all because it's a brand new technology. And then natural language processing, a little bit familiar, like just under 20%. Machine learning, only about 15%, but that one's been around for a lot longer, right? Deep learning, almost nobody really knows that. It's like 6%. Reinforcement, they don't understand that. That's only about recommendations. People are familiar from Amazon and Google and everybody else. Really, only about 15%. And then embedded AI, they're not familiar with, but embedded it has been in the market a lot longer than generative AI. So one of the other questions we started asking about this particular trend is, what do you think is going to happen when all these AIs come together? Right? Is it true there would be a singularity? Is it not true? What do you really think? So I like the fact that you're involved in this area, and I agree with it as a trend, but I'm seeing a lot higher bar than just this level of worrying about generative and what it's going to do for teachers having to recognize when a kid has used it for their paper, right? And those sorts of policy level things. I think it's way deeper than that. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think you're right. I think, most telling to me from this particular graph is the winner by far, 50% say none of the above. We are the very early stages of understanding this. In fact, anyone who's purporting to be an expert, I think there's some very thoughtful people doing very good work in very smart ways around generative and other parts of AI, thinking about what this means for education sectors. But to be clear, I mean, this hit the market, what, 12, 18 months ago in a meaningful
Mhm.
way in the generative
Yeah,
space. You know, it's
yeah.
hard to be a self-described expert when the new tools came out 2 weeks ago. So
I
I think it's important
know.
to be thoughtful in how we approach this. What I'm excited about is as we think about the SAFE framework, AI and these technologies are going to be regulated, just as social media, as student data privacy, as cybersecurity, as these other things have been regulated. The opportunity now is as we come out of the gate, as this administration and Congress and others, as well as states and globally, you know, this work is happening globally, that we do so together, that we think
Right,
about, you know, those folks who are actually building this work, you know, not just at the platform level with OpenAI and Google and some others, but also, you know, solution providers and others are part of that conversation. And we break through what the traditional history has been, which is, you know, teachers good, districts also good, private sector bad. You know, there's been this you know sort of love-hate relationship, and sometimes well earned. You know, but the reality is by saying, hey, we are committed to these goals. We're not sure exactly where we're going. You know, none of us. But as policymakers, not just learn to spell AI, but are forced into, you know, passing regulation, which will definitely happen over the next you know, few months and then the next 6, 12 and future, the builders and the people who actually have the capacity to create this stuff being a part of the conversation and acknowledging and showing that look, education is special and we want to do this the right way for everybody. I think
right.
is an opportunity. That's the trend. Is really that I'm excited about is bringing traditionally unusual suspects together to inform and consider and be smart about what the modernizing education infrastructure is going to look like.
Yeah, and I'm gonna just take us off target right now because I know we want to talk about all five, but we're not going to have enough time. Like, and even if there is five, but I want to go into this just a little bit more and talk about the fact that I think AI is also needing to be punched up from the viewpoint of what are the co-intelligences on the human side. Because when you, like our surveys were showing this, as soon as you bring up AI, people are in fear, like any new trend, right? Like, oh my gosh, it's going to take my job. I already have to do more work, right? Like I think it's going to personalize learning more for kids, but I also think it's going to be more work for me or take my job, blah, blah, blah. That's what the data is showing. Started bringing up the nine human intelligences. And one of the first things that struck us when we were doing this research was, oh my goodness, there's two, mathematical logical and the literacy one. We focus on everything we do in K-12. We don't anything with the rest of them except maybe tangentially, right? And that is definitely going to need to be pushed up if we're going to hope to have humanity in a position to use each individual person's best intelligence for their own work. We need to ready them to do that, not sublimate other intelligences, but let them rise so that we have a hope to balance AI, right? Rather than just go, okay, you just got to be mathematical or literary, right? Like, what about these other ones, right? So, anyway, so what are your thoughts on that?
Um, you know, very important. And I'm reminded that I am old enough to remember when one to one was special, was new. Not everybody had one to one computers. And I'm reminded of Mark Edwards. He was the superintendent in Mooresville schools here in North Carolina. He ended up being, I think, National Superintendent of the Year one year. And a lot of that was because of their forward thinking approach on technology and going one to one K through 12.
Right.
And, you know, Mark would share with everyone that, you know, we're not special because we're one to one. We are using those computers to do the work of education, to do those things. We take it from the approach, not of a technology centric approach, but one to one is a tool to help us do the things we are committed to do for all students and all teachers. And so I feel the same way about this idea of around intelligences and you know AI is It's a new tool. It's a calculator. It's quite frankly, like I think it's actually a tool designed for creativity. It's in generative AI is a tool for creativity, not a tool for massive analysis. There are other deep learning and machine learning and other things that do that, not generative. And so I think these are new tools that
Mhm.
are provide an opportunity for us to really meet the higher order goals that we have, supporting students to be successful, supporting whole schools to support their communities and drive economies, to help people move forward, and to add efficiencies and gains, et cetera. Not to replace or get rid of the core thing that has driven learning since the beginning of time, which is relationships, right? Which is teachers and students learning from each other, which is relevance, which is having effectiveness and rigor, right? As Bill Daggett would say, who's led a lot of great work around school models and others for decades. The opportunity of AI is not a hype cycle or replacement or to fix a broken system. It is to consider and have a new tool in the tool belt for us
Yeah.
to do the thing that's most important. And when we do that, when I see districts and providers and states thinking about that in that way, how should we leverage AI to do things differently than we've done in the past? It reminds me of my TI-81 when I wasn't allowed to use a calculator in elementary and middle in the late 1900s. But then by high school, I was in trouble if I didn't bring the TI-81 to class for calculus, right? And so we learned over time how these should work and what makes the most
Yeah.
sense. And I think that's the type of things when we focus on the goals, we win.
Texas Instruments, TI.
Yes.
So blast from the past, right? So I know we could go through things like, the trend in like effectiveness and the whole science of this and the science of that and blah, 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 and teacher training. And we need to do more with teacher training. They need to stop lecturing. They need to doing more Socratic questions. They need to start doing project-based learning, la, 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 la. All of this and talk about funding, which is fun, and also absenteeism, which is massive. It's 25% of the population. We could talk about attrition, which is so huge. The Learning Council has projected that we're going to be public sector, including will only be 50% of the market by 2030, right? And it feels to me like it's almost accelerating beyond our initial projections, which were done only 2 months ago. So anyway, just from talking to people as they go back to school in various different districts, I'm like, holy cow, you just let 500 more administrators go. Holy cow, you just lost another 4,700 kids. It's been really, really an interesting moment in time. So then that leads me to the infrastructure, which I know I've talked to you about before as one of the major trends, but I want you to think about this from infrastructure from a new perspective. If you line up all those trends, absenteeism, we think, oh, maybe that's part of COVID, learning loss, that's part of COVID. If we line up the lack of teacher, the massive teacher shortage, they're all feeling very overwhelmed with their 300 apps and demands for full personalization for every single student. Every single student seems to be now having an individual education plan, and they're trying to manage more with more units, 6 to 7 units a day. And it's just too much for any human being to actually do and manage increased disciplinary problems. The fact that there's immigration wave that has come in. Districts are saying we have to speak to 124 languages. School in New York, where they've got 900 out of 1,000 kids are brand new to the country from different also understandings of what education could do to advance in their life. They don't feel like other countries that's not necessarily the case. We have a culture in America of you use education as a tool to get forward in life and advance. That's not necessarily something that is inculcated into the awareness for other cultures, right? Like educate here, right? The sort of thing. So we have that, and then we have alpha generation, which has been proven by data to spend 50% of their lives on their screens, which is why iPhones are, schools are trying to take away phones right now because you can't lecture at kids that are buried in their phones, right? But they don't want lecture. They don't understand why you're taking the phone away most of the time. And they don't understand why words are coming out of your human mouth because they don't at home, unless mom is yelling at them. Nobody sits down to dinner together. This alien ground going to a place where all of you sit forward and listen to a human. It doesn't happen anywhere else because the church attendance is really low now nationally. So when I look at all of that, like just put all that in a pile for a second, Karl, and say to yourself, what does this future look like? Are we actually in a structural shift? Do we need to do differently? Are we still supposed to be a manufacturing line that we were for the last 250 years? When we fell out of the agrarian age and we went into the manufacturing age, there was a reason to do the Prussian model, right? Get everybody the same, we had a homogeneous population, we wanted to normalize everything, and that worked until the 1950s, the peak, right? And then it started to fall off. Maybe we need to be looking at structure totally differently. Like whole group is just getting killed. Every piece of data I see from research teachers talk about teach whole group, they're all like, oh, working more. So maybe the structure needs to be different. What are your thoughts on that? Maybe the change and the trend is bigger than we know.
Leila, I think you bring up some interesting points. I would challenge one piece and then remind us about
Mm-hmm.
another. I think there's some pretty broad generalizations around what's happening in classrooms. When I engage with educators, when I see the uniquity and opportunity in the ways students are engaging with different technologies or activating, learning. I see, more personalization that's ever been possible, compared to a textbook. I see educators who care deeply about the
Mm-hmm.
work. I think
Yeah.
while obviously I see, frankly, the economies of those who invest in public education outstripping their peers for the last 100 years. Here in North Carolina, I work nationally and globally. Here in North Carolina, K-12 public schools are the largest employer in 60% of the counties.
Yeah.
If we
I
don't
don't
invest
doubt that that's
there,
true
what's
almost
the
everywhere.
impact in local economic impact for those organizations right now, let alone the opportunity for long-term producing great skilled workforce. And so I think what you describe, and I would where I would challenge is this idea of I would just say that while trends are moving in a direction, just like global warming is trending in a direction, we have decisions that we can make to invest to get the outcome we want. And so if communities
I
and
don't doubt that.
industries,
Yeah, I don't
um,
doubt that. What I'm questioning is structure.
yeah,
And I don't say it doesn't need to be public, although it's really on the drive to be privatized and homeschooled. I mean, North Carolina, you just brought them up, it's the state you live in. It has the highest rate of homeschooling growth of any state. So it's a very interesting moment time to talk about structure. So when I'm talking about structure, I'm not talking about let's have everything go to a private school or have everything go to homeschool. What I'm talking about is the structure of the whole group learning model, the manufacturing model. The bell rings, you go to the next class, the bell rings, you go to the next class. And I'm not talking about its polar opposite, which is all online, where you rarely, if ever, see a teacher. It's all chatbot or weekly check-ins, right? I think there's maybe some middle ground, which
I
is
think
what
the
our
investments in infrastructure are important, and
Mhm.
we have opportunities to do that. I think first off, I'm going to go back to since Socrates and Plato, the human engagement, the responsiveness, human relationship has been the driver for learning and education and knowledge building in the history of the world. Sometimes that is scaled through the printing press and through some of these others. If I look at and engage with, whether it's charter schools, traditional public schools, my own children's schools, I don't just see a bell ringing and nothing happening. I see some of that, seminar work. I see, large projects. I see personalization across different students doing different things. I think the reality is we have an opportunity to invest. This is also a state, to use homeschool and allocation, we have to choose. This is also a state that has, on the ballot right now, a woman who's homeschooled six of her students, or her six children, and calls schools indoctrination centers. As the Republican candidate for state superintendent, she wants to defund public schools. The reality is, I think what's happening, I think that's a bad idea, to be very candid. On the other side, Mo Green is an experienced non-educator, is a lawyer that started, who had administrative experience in Charlotte, Mecklenburg, and Guilford County, who believes that all students should get access, not just kids who can pay for it. And so to this type of innovative learning. They're also doing innovative work around student data privacy and safe. They're one of the leaders in education innovation as well at the state and district level. And so I
Yeah.
think the opportunity is for us. It is no longer. I think the trend that we're seeing is not a pot that is boiling the frog, but likely a flashpoint of recognition that, hey, there's different competitive factors. People are having more options than they've had before. And it's, I think, motivating for public education, the traditional system, to modernize and scale what they're doing for other people, for all students, in a
Right.
way that those who maybe can do it in small bits, at higher prices, have had the opportunity to prove out.
Well, let's talk about that right there, because I don't disagree with anything you just said, except maybe 2 points. One is our data showed that 50% of students during COVID learned better. They don't need a teacher all the time. There is a bell curve, right? So every
I
human
didn't
is
I
slightly
didn't say they needed a teacher all the time.
okay, good. And then
Learning is
the
a
other,
personal, opportunity, exploration. They've got to commit to. Yeah, I'm
yeah,
not
and I don't
discounting.
I don't disagree that some kids absolutely have to have the human energy around them and somebody aiding their learning. I think that's very terribly true. So I want to have you think with running the ball down the middle, right? Like over here is homeschool, everybody leaves, or private schools. Over here is public schools, charters, online schools, sponsored by states, blah, 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 right? And the online world has very little human interaction. And it's definitely not for everybody, right? Unless a method is changed, right, in terms of how you interact there. But let us say that the research, I know this research just came out from Power School, that they had some 36% of teachers say whole group is not working. So let's just pivot on that for a second. Let us just say that because Amazon can get a box to you within the same day, or FedEx can get a box anywhere in the world within 24 hours, and Uber can pick you up within minutes, that there's something going on with the logistics in whole group. Let's do this for just a second and say that maybe we could cohort small group based on individual pace and still intersect with teaching and still allow more time flexibility, because the middle ground where this generation is coming from based on the outside research of other industries, what are they doing that's driving this sort of new public consciousness and a new expectation, is flexible time, flexible space. Don't want to give up human teaching. How do you do that?
Yeah, I
So what do
think
you guys?
that first off, I mean, I think um, I think we have seen an openness or a new recognition of the opportunities through COVID. It was an accelerant for a lot of people who didn't have visibility to the nuances and challenges, and frankly, lack of investment into the
Yeah.
infrastructure of schools to be able to be, for many, the last social safety net for families. I mean, North Carolina schools were the largest restaurant in 2020 and 2021. They fed more people too. So I think there's been a lack of investment. I think investing and providing the opportunity for that type of innovation, that type of transition at scale, has to happen collectively, not just with individual opportunity, not just for the wealthiest. And so
Yeah.
I think the investments that we can make in research and development and education, just to be
Yeah.
clear, since World War II, research and development investments in other sectors, military, transportation, communication, have been single to double digit increasing every year since World War II. In
Wow. Didn't know
education,
that.
it's close to zero. It's close to zero. Investments from at a federal and a state level in R&D to test this stuff. That's why I'm so excited about rapid cycle evaluation and effectiveness. We need
Yeah.
infrastructure to be able to see, share, and figure out what's learning quickly, and to help those rural districts, suburban districts, and large urban districts, et cetera, share what they're learning and implement in situations where you've got time and opportunities. I think expanding community engagement, thinking about what a teacher is, expanding that. There's a great organization, Throughline Education, that has tons of research and is implementing the ability actually to allow not just certified teachers, but bring the community in as a part of that education process for that type of temporal or spatial flexibility, but also gets better results for students. And they're
Right.
doing that with school districts in Rhode Island and other states, in Brooklyn, and that's fantastic. So these things are happening, and what I get worried about, LeiLani, sometimes are these considerations that, like, for a long time the baseline has been the system is broken. Let's go to a new system. The
Yeah.
reality is the system is transforming. We should invest in this system, not just because I have kids in school, or my wife is a teacher, or my mother is a teacher, but because it underlies our economic opportunity within our community. It is the definition of how we move forward. And there's other things that will change in our communities over time. But unless we invest together, I think we separate. And we have this country has a long history of seeing what happens when we separate, when we redline, when we choose to have flight away from a system rather, but when we invest together in it in a modern way, not think great things happen. And quite frankly, what I think COVID did was open the doors and recognition that there should be more flexibility in how we invest, and invest in different and new ways. But to also, that investment also means investing in the people who are doing it, that not
Right.
just teachers in the classroom, but also the communities, partners, the researchers, the parents and communities that are doing this work. I think that's the opportunity we have in front of us.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I will keep pounding on this issue of, like, what do we need to be? But in the viewpoint of how do we retain the public investment in public education? Because if we completely 100% privatize everything, then what are we doing filtering the money through government?
Just
Then
create
there's a tax,
accountability.
then there's a tax base, right? Like everybody
The,
be like, why are you running the money, right? Like, why don't we just do it ourselves? So it's a very interesting moment, right? Because it could go either way, right? Like either
Leilani,
we just continue that. Yeah,
I totally agree with you. And
yeah,
I was a teacher in the classroom. I became a CFO for charter schools the first year they started, mostly because in my big district, I thought the back office was screwing up what we were trying to do in the classroom. And so I wanted to understand how they worked and get more investment to teachers to allow them to make decisions. And that was, again, late 1900s. It's been a while, but this is the same situation. I don't have a problem with the type of innovations that you're outlining. My suggestion, and I functionally don't care what the tax status of the organization that's doing it, for profit, nonprofit, et cetera. That's a tax status. My only excitement and concern and advice to policymakers is, if you are going to funnel or invest in those types of innovations as if they are innovations, ensure that they are accountable to the types of results we want this system to produce,
yeah. I
that
totally agree
they
with that.
do the things
I don't
that
know
we want to
anybody that
do.
would disagree. Like, I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, if you look at, I'll take my state again,
Yeah,
allocated up to $1 billion over the next few years to private school vouchers with zero accountability. No questions about testing, no questions about outcomes, no questions about where those dollars are going. no requirements for supporting all students. You get to choose their student. I don't have a problem with innovation. What I have a problem is when those dollars go out the door, a lot of schools just increase their prices by $3,000 for the voucher and keep running. And it undermines the ability to figure out what's actually working for our kids in our community and our economy. And so I'm excited about those investments that we make collectively into that moving
Yes.
forward.
Yes.
Clearly, I get animated about this stuff.
Yes, I know. You and I are like, ugh, so it's like it's a very exciting time. But I think it's dimensionally exciting. There's like so many different
Yes.
ways we can take this conversation. All right, well, I need to let our listeners go for now, but stay on because I want to talk to you a little bit more, and then maybe we can decide what we can do to talk about next time you get on the show. All right, but thank you very much, Karl. I really, really appreciate your insight, and I appreciate your enthusiasm too.
Thank you for your work, Leilani. I appreciate the chance to share with you and think about what's going to move us forward together.
Good. Well, thank you. All right. And thank you for listening to another episode of the Learning Council's podcast. This has been your host, LeiLani Cawthon. Keep listening and keep learning.